Today we'll be discussing the role of natural language processing in information retrieval, NLP in IR. The question that comes to mind with regard to these two is, will natural language processing ever become an integral part of IR? Or are the two so different, like oil and water, that they'll never be able to mix? We're going to look at 5 questions today in an effort to answer this initial question. First of all, what is natural language processing? Second, what is information retrieval, at least in the context of this discussion? Third, how could natural language processing enhance IR were they to be melded? 4, what would make natural language processing, information retrieval, integration work? 5, what might the future hold for NLP-IR in the best of both worlds? What would it be like if they actually worked well together? So what is natural language processing? Some people refer to it as computational linguistics, others text analysis. But what it truthfully is software designed to interpret textual data, to be able to tell you what the meaning was, to be able to tell you what the content is. There are 7 levels of linguistic analysis, and natural language processing handles 5 of them. It handles, first of all, morphological analysis, that is, the word components being analyzed, so suffixes, prefixes, and so forth. Lexical analysis involves word meaning analysis. In other words, what is the part of speech? Is it a noun, is it a verb, and so forth? And what is the meaning of that word? Third is syntactic analysis, and what that means is grammatical structures being analyzed. How are the sentences being put together, and what does that tell you about meaning? Semantic analysis involves measuring the meaning of sentences, and here word sense disambiguation is used because some words can be used differently in different sentences. Fifth, is discourse, and that is the analysis of structure and meaning in a document or documents. So what is the structure, and therefore what is the meaning coming from that document? Or what is the text looking like in context of all the contents? This involves text larger than 1 sentence long, so you'd have to look at a body of text. So that's what natural language processing is theoretically. Let's talk about how it's operated and used in software form. So in our own use here of information retrieval software, we've already talked about some of these. Stop word removal, taking out the and, the, and the a, and other useless words. Stemming, bringing words with endings such as ing or s back to their lowest common denominator, their purest form. Part of speech tagging, as we've already mentioned, that has to do with deciding, is it a noun, is it a verb, is it an adverb? And then word sense disambiguation, which we already spoke about, is figuring out what is the meaning of this word as opposed to another similar word or the word being used in a different context. And then finally, text classification, which is the biggest overview of what it does. Documents can be looked at as a corpus, a big group, or on a single level, and it could be classified. Should it go in this group? Should it go in that group? Another function not mentioned here is actually sentiment analysis, in which we decide through the software, does this document or this batch of documents have a predominantly negative tone or positive tone? This can tell a lot about what's going on in that document. So that's what NLP is. What is IR in this context? Well, in the purest sense, IR is finding and delivering relevant information corresponding to the information needs that are expressed by a user. In other words, giving back to the user what they need. Now, the user enters queries, and then what comes back to them is documents. So that's what we're talking about today, is document retrieval. Now, document retrieval is enabled by IR algorithms, and these are otherwise known as search engines, which we've been talking about a lot this semester. Search engines break into 2 basic groups. You have Boolean search engines, which generally create exact matching, and that returns a very narrow set of documents. So the query is authored by the user, and they include words like and or not to get more bang for the buck, to get more value, to get more results coming back with specific parameters. Statistical search uses similarity measures, and it generally brings back a broader set of documents. So statistical search ranks the documents based on a similarity measure, comparing it to the query, and we've done a little of that. And then it estimates probability of relevance, and so relevance can be established. We've already done a little bit of that. Finally, these numerically weighted terms are put together so that a lot of different analysis can be accomplished. We've looked at several different ways of analyzing document retrieval, and there are many, many more. So that's the statistical approach, and it generally brings back a fairly broad set of documents because it's not looking for exact, it's looking for similar words and phrases. So that's what IR is in the context of this discussion. Now, how could natural language processing enhance IR? Well, if you think about it, documents and queries, they contain human language, and that's exactly what NLP is designed to analyze. So it makes sense that NLP really could help to analyze this language flow, either in queries or in the documents themselves. Okay, so now if you look at it, IR has actually already been a part of our world this semester because, I should say, NLP is already a part of our world this semester because IR algorithms do use some NLP functions. For instance, stop word removal. So when you take out the ands, the thes, and the a's, and other useless words, then we're talking about NLP. Stemming of words, taking off the endings to make them bring them back to their core meaning, taking off the INGs, the S's, and so forth. That's stemming. That's an NLP process. POS tagging is also used sometimes, and that's an NLP process. But what about the higher levels of NLP, like syntactic and semantic? Well, those things could actually be of great value too, because they bring out the meaning in the documents. And the meaning in the documents is the reason we're here in the first place. So now word sense disambiguation and semantic analysis in particular have been identified to have some real value in IR because, for instance, the user could put in a query, and of course they don't put any more words than they have to. Whereas the NLP software could add synonyms and clarifying terms based on its analysis of those words and their meanings. So it actually could expand the value of the query by inserting additional terms that would help to make the query more meaningful. The other thing is that you could interpret word meanings from context using NLP. So in IR, we don't interpret word meanings, we just look at terms and so forth, but NLP can do that. It can say, based on the context, what does this word mean, and therefore should this document be returned to the user? So if you think about narrow Boolean searches where it's exact matching and sometimes it's a little too narrow, it could be that NLP would expand that out and give you a little better variety of documents to choose from. In terms of statistical analysis in IR, that could be refined. It's generally fairly broad and you get a large set of documents returned. But NLP could help to refine which documents have meaning that matters. And those are the ones you should look at. So when you get 10,000 documents, maybe only 50 of them are worth looking at. And NLP could help you to determine that. Finally, there's a problem with something called synonymy and polysemy, and that is words that it's one word that could match the meaning of another word. Or you could have one word that has more than one meaning. So that confuses IR software. But NLP could be able to sort that out based on the context. It could determine what the word really means in this particular situation. So that's how NLP could enhance information retrieval. How about it? Has it worked? Has anyone tried it? Well, the fact is that so far, IR-NLP integration has not been very successful. There's a number of reasons for this. Experts have posed 3 probable reasons. Number 1, NLP is best for longer queries. In other words, it likes more input. The more words you give it, the more effective it can be. And most users don't like to put in long queries, so a few words just doesn't do it for NLP. The other thing that happens is that NLP sometimes throws processing errors and they slow down the system. And it sometimes generates incorrect returns. And that's not a great thing when you're working in a very big, busy IR system. So it turns out the syntactic and semantic analysis use up a lot of processing time, a lot of storage space, and this creates a problem for IR systems. So what happens? Out the door. Third is non-NLP alternatives turned out performed actually better with lower processing costs. So It turns out, for instance, that naive Bayes classifiers, support vector machines, and other statistical classifiers do a really great job. And they don't waste a lot of processing because it turns out that the people who design these softwares have done a very good job of making them work efficiently. And so therefore they perform better in the IR context. So the history between NLP and IR hasn't been so great. Now, what would happen, or what could happen? What would make NLP work better with IR? Again, experts have looked at this question. So for one thing, NLP functions could be optimized for the IR environment. If you're talking about speed and processing being important, and if you're talking about cost being limited in IR applications, or if you're talking about the fact that suboptimal data sets are usually available in IR, those are things that could be planned for, accounted for, and dealt with in the NLP application software. But that has not happened so far. Another thing is that previous attempts, many people think that previous attempts to bring in the NLP to IR were just really sort of rough coupling. In other words, they were just jammed together. And that's not really an integration. So real integration was, no one really thinks that great integration has been tried. So it's thought that realignment in NLP research is necessary so that, for instance, NLP is very application, it's dependent on a lot of exactness and precision in the applications. That doesn't fit IR, as we mentioned earlier. So machine translation, a separate NLP process, that works great with all that precision. But perhaps some of that precision could be reduced so that NLP could work better with IR rather. And also, many degrees of uncertainty and approximations are necessary in IR. And that's really not the best thing for NLP, but that could be adjusted. So NLP software could be adjusted to make this happen. Now, rather than throwing out the existing NLP or saying it's not worthwhile, it could still be used in its own environments. But when it comes to meshing NLP with IR, a new track, a parallel track could be established. Some think that this would be a good thing to do. Create a new vein in NLP research which focuses on making NLP work in the IR environment. Those are some of the things that could possibly make NLP IR integration work. So what do people think about the future of NLP and IR? What do you think about it? Well, here's what I think about it. I think I agree with Susan Feldman. In 1999, when she was the president of Data Search, here's what she said. She said, I believe that systems that use more NLP and at more levels of language understanding have the most potential for building the data mining and advanced information system retrieval systems of the future. In other words, NLP at higher levels in IR will produce the world that we'd like to see. That's what she believed. So for instance, here are the things that she contends. NLP will help users to have better queries and more appropriate questions on the information entry end. So their information needs could be met better. So NLP can intercede at the entry level. NLP could also work at the other end when the documents come back. Because as we mentioned before, reading context and summarizing what's going on, that's something that NLP does well. So at the other end, the returns could be better analyzed and you could spend less time reading the wrong documents. So she thinks those are important things not to lose sight of. Finally, in the big picture, here's what she says we should be looking forward to. We should be looking to create a meaning-based system instead of a word or term-based system. So in information retrieval, it's not just words that matter. It's the thoughts. It's what we're looking for in terms of content. And that's where NLP excels. So creating a meaning-based system is more likely to happen if NLP is involved. Also, it can't be forgotten that there are certain financial values attached to positive software performance. So, if somebody manages to get NLP and IR to work together, they can stand to make a lot of money. That certainly might be the motivation that could bring this about. The other thing is that there's a great deal of social value in having these types of applications function well. So if there's societal value to it, somebody altruistically might think, I need to make that happen because it'll make this a better world. And the possibilities for software that does this type of retrieval are really limitless. So there are both positive financial and social implications for doing this. So there are great motivations. So that makes it more likely that this could happen. Finally, one of the things that most people have acknowledged is that there are a lot of advanced technologies that are coming into their own these days, and NLP is just one of them. The fact is that right along with the rest, it's likely to be swept into the information retrieval arena, whether people like it or not. For instance, if you look at other technologies, they are sometimes being combined with NLP in its own domain. Why not combine them under the heading of IR? So if you look at content mapping, or if you look at automatic summarization, that's what we're talking about, getting your documents analyzed for you. Cross-language retrieval, so put a query in Chinese, get everything back in English, or have it come back in Chinese and have it dictated back to you in English. Whatever needs to happen between languages. Also, relationship extraction. You can find out how one document relates to another. You can find out how thoughts relate to other thoughts. Question answering systems are being developed now. We've seen one. When Watson was on TV doing Jeopardy, that system was running a question answering system. Finally, visualization is really coming into its own. We're seeing some amazing visualization softwares these days. So visualization definitely is something that's going to be coming in, and that could be matched with NLP along with, more importantly, speech recognition. NLP would be great with speech recognition because once you talk to your computer, it could convert that into text. That could be analyzed by NLP. That would be sent to the IR system, and before you know it, you've got happy results in terms of appropriate returns. So all of this is what Susan Feldman and many other specialists think the future could bring. Previous results have not been positive, and it's discouraged many people, but I tend to be an optimistic person, so I tend to think this is probably likely in the future. So while NLP and IR have not gotten along particularly well until now, I mean, obviously there's been a little bit of a struggle there. Many people think that it's really about to change, and it's time that NLP and IR really sort of kiss and make up. Thank you.